I thought I would begin with the double stops just because I think that's a little bit easier. Um, and you can, I don't know if you can see it or not, it's kind of blurred out back there, but I've got a circle of fifths pulled up back there somewhere. And as when we get into the scales, you might want to have a circle of fifths if you don't know your scales really well. So at some point you might want to pull one of those up on the internet as we get into this. But double stops, I'm going to talk about that. Double stops are used a lot by violin players and fiddle players to just kind of harmonize melodies, if you will. So a great example of this is instead of having like a melody that goes, let's take that, that's just a simple melody. You can harmonize it underneath, and you can bring in a little more depth to it. I call these layers. So instead of it just being it is now. And I always tell everyone, think about it, envision it like two people singing. So one person is singing the top note, and then somebody else is singing underneath. Now, unfortunately, it requires you to have a little bit of knowledge about your scales. So you can't just, you can't just take whatever notes you want. Like you couldn't just go, right? That sounds awful. So how do you know which note goes underneath? You have to know the notes of your scales or your keys. So if you don't know that, then you're going to want to know that, especially the key of G, which is what I'm going to be working from tonight. So the first one, and in my opinion the most useful, are what are called thirds. Now, basically, if you're in a G scale and you have a G as your root note, right? What is a third away from G? It would be G, A, B. So on the banjo, and you can see this in the tab, there's a G there, but there is a B right here on the 4th fret of the 3rd string. So when you play these two notes together, G and B, by the way, then you get that kind of sound. All right. Now, if we go up in the scale from G and we go to the next note in the scale, that is an A. However, if we count from that same letter, A, B, C, C is the third away. So what we have is we have like these little pairs so far. We have G and B, and then A and C. And A and C is found here on your banjo. 7th fret of the 4th string, 5th fret of the 3rd string. Now, these are some what I would consider less traditional fingerings. So I'm basically playing G and B and A and C here. I use these, but at the same time, I will tell you that you're not going to see this as much in the traditional banjo vocabulary. But the way I've arranged it on this sheet is I like to do things from low to high. So what I'm basically doing is I'm starting at the lowest G on the banjo rather than somewhere up here and just going through it. So if we keep going up the scale, G, A, B, B is next, and then 3 away from B, B, C, D. So when you put B and D together, you get this, B and D. Now, this makes for something quite interesting that we can finally put to use here. I'm going to kind of come in. So G and B, A and C, and B and D. So now I'm going to practice just moving back and forth through these three things. You can hear the sound. Or maybe you start here and go down and come back. You start to hear something maybe you recognize there. It could be simple. It could be a nursery rhyme. Now, we can put rolls to this, and I think I demonstrated this in one of the videos there, which is you can do something like this. You can go 4, 3, 1. 4, 3, 1 twice, and then 4, 1. Something like that. And then when I put this together, now you can use that basically any time that you have a G chord. G chord. As an improvisational tool, or if you have a melody let's say you have a melody on the low string. Quite boring to just kind of one finger, one note it, right? So rather than do that, you now have. Questions about that so far? I don't want to go any further until that makes sense. Hopefully I'm not losing anybody here. Let me know if I am. But the main thing you got to know is you got to know your scales. That's kind of the whole point of this whole thing, I guess, is that if you don't know your scales, that's probably the place to start before getting into this. So, you know, you might ask yourself, why am I using these two notes as opposed to these two notes? Well, that note's not in the scale or the key, so you can't use that. So I'm not going to sit here and go through every single one of the notes, but I will give you enough. Thirds are the most useful because they're very harmonious, if you will, very consonant sounding. There's no really anything that sounds, you know, dissonant or out there, if you will. So these things are great for harmonizing melody. So what I recommend is starting on your G, G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, and harmonizing that in thirds. And you can do a roll while doing this sort of thing. You can country guitar players, they do this kind of thing where they get, you know, kind of twangy sounds, if you will. You can expand on this. I don't want to get into it too much because I don't want to make it too complicated, but people will use these ideas for licks. Like I've got one that I do that's a G lick where I add in extra things. So instead of it just being, I go. Sounds more complicated than it actually is. It's just this, but I'm adding a note before the third. But in order to be able to do some more complicated lick like that, you've got to know your thirds. You've got to know your basic thirds. Questions so far? Anyone? And like I said, these thirds, this handout is in the Patreon, but it's also now on my website. You'll find a link underneath if you want this double stop study. It's not all of them. My plan is to do a maybe a part 2, but that's okay. This is certainly enough to keep most people busy for a while. Now, what you're going to do next, unfortunately, what we're dealing with stringed instruments is that you have multiple ways of playing the same notes. So you've got G and B here, but you also have G and B here. So what's coming next on the document is basically the same exact thing moved up a string. So now, instead of it being, I just do the same thing starting on the second and third strings. So something like that. It's the exact same notes moved up a different string. That's all. Now, unfortunately, it's all different shapes now. So you have, you know, your G and B there, and now A and C here, and then B and D, C and E. Okay, same exact notes, just different places on the fingerboard. You can start to kind of create your own little exercises to get more fluid with this. You don't want to always play them in order, like, right? So what I do is I just do these things more random. I might jump around. Something like that. Or now, make it more complicated, move around 2 different sets of strings randomly. So maybe there's a gospel tune that I have on my channel. It's been actually one of my most popular tabs for some reason, but it's called Just a Closer Walk with Thee. And in that tab, and that's just thirds with chromaticism added in, basically, is all that it is. So I use this a lot. I'm going to keep going, and then I'm going to make a reference to a tune. I highly recommend, if you haven't heard this tune, to check out Bill Emerson's song Theme Time. I think J.D. Crowe did it as well. My memory's escaping me. I think so. Could be wrong. But in that song, I won't play the whole thing, but you'll hear this really long stretch of, okay, those things. Those are thirds. And you'll even hear people like Earl Scruggs play them in a little bit of, say, ground speed there. So these thirds are also in traditional bluegrass. I use these in traditional bluegrass, but I also use them in waltzes. Just to reference another song on this channel is that I did the song Roxanne's Waltz. Roxanne's Waltz. And somewhere in there, there's this D run where I go, and that is all just thirds. There's your third I just went over just a minute ago, and then there was this one that's coming here soon. So that's another example. But theme time and ground speed are easy places to hear just thirds in a traditional bluegrass song. So what you have is you have sets on the fourth and third strings, on the second and third string, and then a set on this string. Now, one last thing, and then I'm going to move on and talk more about how to use them. What people might get really confused by is that it doesn't have to start on G. And this is going to be a theme that I revisit in tonight's live stream, which is you don't always have to start something on G just because it's, say, a G scale. You want to get to the point to where you know it so well that you can start it anywhere. And it's the same thing with this thirds business. So here, I'm not starting on a G anything. I'm starting on a B and a D. It's a B and a D, and then a C and an E, and a D and an F sharp. So G doesn't even come into play until you get here. So you want to get into the habit of knowing it so well that you can play it in any order, okay? And that's kind of the thing. Anybody have any questions? It's awful quiet here. I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I also feel like I have a lot to get through. I may not get through all of it. It just depends. We may have a part 2 coming our way here, because I just spent 16 minutes talking about thirds. Hopefully thirds are making sense. Let me give you a demonstration I think would be great. So easy demonstration is somebody like Don Reno would play slow songs. That kind of stuff is thirds. Any kind of he's harmonizing notes with these patterns. I wish I could give you an example of a tune. Even the old song I'm using my Bible for a roadmap in there. It's been years since I've played that, but I'm pretty sure he uses thirds in that song. So that's another one you can go check out. You know what? I'm going to do this a little less traditional just because I don't want to leave out some of the weirder, more obscure sounds. I feel like there's already so much of this on the internet that if I go to sixths, I would say that sixths, it's a terrible word to say, sixths, that is the most common one other than thirds. So that's what I would recommend going to first, is knowing your thirds and then your sixths. Okay, and like I told everyone in the Patreon, is that this has been done a lot already. So, but what has not been done is some of the things I might be talking about next, which are fourths. So let's talk about fourths. They have an interesting sound. Here's fourths. Okay, so I always use this. They have kind of a heavy sound, if you will. They're easy to play, though, is the great thing about them, because you could literally just do like a bar chord. That kind of sound. But they're not going to be as useful for traditional bluegrass. But let me just kind of go over this real quick. So instead of counting over threes, you count over fours. So if you're in G, G, A, B, C. C is the fourth away from G. So you've got G here, and then the C is directly across from it. So it's an easy one. You can just bar like that, no problems. And then if you count up from A, B, C, D is 4-way. So that's here. So if you put these two together, you get A and D. Okay. Now what's really cool about this fourth business is that the first three are the same. So you just go right up. Where it gets a little bit more challenging is when it gets to, and I want to talk about this special one, is when it gets to C. Yes, exactly. It sounds like smoke under the water. When you get to C, people make a mistake here. C, D, E, F. Oh, it's F. It would not be correct in this case because remember, we're in the key of G. G does not have an F. It has an F sharp. So we don't want to just go. It's not that simple. You can't just. We're done, unfortunately. So you have to compensate for that F sharp in there and make sure you're in the key. Okay, but after that, we're back to our pattern. And you're back to where you can just use the fingering, okay? So here's the whole thing. Okay, now this is going to be, like I said, a little less useful for traditional bluegrass sounds. But how might I use this is like if I'm in a G, that's what we call a suspension because you've got a fourth instead of a third. So you're getting kind of a suspenseful sound. You probably want to resolve it. You don't want to hang out there too long in a tonal kind of manner, if you will, something that's tonal. Now, that's fair game depending on what you want. I keep referencing my own stuff, but that's just what comes to mind. I've got a song that I wrote that's how heavy that sounds and that effect of that. And what I did is I just played the fourths. It kind of sounds like hard rock or something, right? So yes, the smoke under the water sound. But people do use this. All sorts of sounds just kind of moving around through that. But where you might use this is like if you're in C, you have a C melody note or a D melody note, you can put these things underneath and just experiment and see what you like the sound of. I'll give you a great place to use them though. A lot of people don't understand this, but I think this will help you out. Where do you go looking for this stuff? Fourths work really well in modal songs. So a good example is like Shady Grove. Okay, Shady Grove, the melody, really simple. Right? Watch this. Do you hear that? So instead of it just being this kind of boring, you now have. Instead of it just being this, I'm harmonizing it with a fourth. Now I'm in a different key there, so my fingerings might be a little bit different, but you still get the idea. I can actually use that one fingering end up with a really unique sound. We'll talk about this in modes. Fourths and fifths are sounds that I use a lot. Okay, so those are your fourths. I'll run through the fingerings. For those of you that don't have the PDF, you can watch the video and get something out of it. So here we go. I'm watching the tab to make sure I don't invent fingerings. Here's the last one. This one's weird. Okay, So those are all the fourth fingerings for the key of G. Nice little easy ones until you get to here. Okay. Fourths were also used in jazz a good bit. Maybe I should play something that uses... Yes, it works in minors, and I'll comment on that. So with fourths, you can create some really unique sounds. McCoy Tyner and John Coltrane, they played a lot of fourths, so you can get kind of... See how modern that sounds? So it can be also not just a hard rock thing, but it could be a jazz thing. People sing in fourths too. That's a very was a primitive thing at one time, but now it's considered more modern, progressive sounding. That kind of thing going on. Whatever you want to do with it. So those little pairs of fourths, they come in real handy for jazz. But yes, you're exactly right. Thank you for bringing that to my attention, because that was something I was going to tell you. Was I tend to use them more in minor keys too, like if I'm going to do traditional stuff. You know, if you're playing Blackberry Blossom, I use fourths on Blackberry Blossom. You could go... And I could use these fourth patterns to improvise. Use those kind of as a bouncing board to make up something. As I always say, pick your battles well, which means don't fool with the fourths until you've got the thirds and the sixes down. Because those are going to be you're going to be able to use those much more. I use a lot of fourths in my writing, but that's because I grew up listening to a lot of rock music, and I like that heavy. That kind of heavy sound is kind of cool to me. All right, so the next one, fifths. Nobody has any questions. We're going to go on to fifths. Okay. Fifths are also used in punk rock, hard rock music. You know, in guitar music, they have what are called power chords. They have those. That sort of thing going on, right? So those are fifths. You've heard them a million times at this point. They're also used in bluegrass. They're used in jazz. Classical music, Debussy, Ravel, Impressionistic music used fifths quite a bit. Here are the fifths. I'll just play through them. The fifths are one of the easiest to play because you don't really have to change your fingerings but one time. I don't know if you caught that or not, but you kind of make this 5 and 3 business, and then it moves up. And not until I got to here did I have to change my fingers. I'm not going to go through the whole thing again, but what are fifths? You just start from G, and you go G, A, B, C, D. So I'm playing a G and a D at the same time. I'm playing a G here and a D across on the second string. So G and D. And then the next one is A. How many away from A? A, B, C, D, E. So A and E. So now when I put this together, really cool, because with one shape you can just, but you still have to know like how many steps do I take, because if you did something like, it's not right. So you still have to know G, A, B, C. And here's something you might try. I don't know. I always try to rework things to figure out like what works best for me. But maybe you could do something like this. This is actually a nice way to do this. Is you could do your thirds and just do the first 3. G, A, B. And then do it again, but with fourths. G, A, B. And now with fifths. G, A, B. So when you do this, thirds, fourths, fifths, You see? And there I've literally harmonized the GAB with all three possibilities so far. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. If I have a melody, once again, sounds a lot different than starts to get the round-eyed girl kind of thing going on there. Fifths are really cool. There's really only, let's see, well, you can do it a couple of ways, but here is my favorite one, which is the first and third string together, open, everybody can do that, and then second and second on the first and third strings. Here's your fifths again, then move it up, right, you with me? So it's just the same pattern. And then finally here, we have to change things because we got to go to an F sharp and 5 away from F sharp, G, A, B, C. If you did this, it would be a C sharp. So you have to change the fingering on this one. So F sharp and C. But then we're back home to our thing. Now, I use this a lot in minor keys as well. So I'm going to give you an example of Blackberry Blossom. Hopefully you can hear that. I know it's a little out there harmonically. If I had somebody playing guitar behind me, you'd be able to hear it a lot better, but with these things, you don't have to kind of worry about like, oh, it's an E minor chord, I always have to be on the E note. Remember, you're just playing in a key here, so all of these dudes, you can move up and around and through. So once again, to make it sound a little closer to the home bass there is I'm playing the fifth, but I'm also playing the second string. And then I get this kind of a little bit more tonally centered. Otherwise, if I just play fifths, ear starts to get pulled away from that a lot more, and it's harder to demonstrate by myself with no accompaniment, but that's the idea behind fifths. And then of course you got some more fifths here. They're kind of aggravating to play, frankly. I don't do these very much. Something like that there. As you can see, my fingers are getting very stressed out, right? So not as fun. Why do that when you can do something easy? So that's my fifths there. I'm trying to think of things. Okay, I'm going to come back to Shady Grove just because that's one that I know. If you go listen to my, I think I just made a post about this too, where I kind of jammed on Shady Grove for like 4 minutes or something. I don't know, it's kind of a long jam. I use a lot of fifths in Shady Grove too. 7 and 7, there's your fifth. And then watch this, the melody goes, I'm going to harmonize that with fifths. So I'm using fifths to harmonize it. Instead of it just being thirds, it's now fifths. Maybe all fifths. If I can do that, let's see. Maybe not. Nah, I don't want to try that because it's going to sound weird in this particular instance. But that was more fifths. So I'll use it to harmonize melodies. I was trying to think if there's something And you have to be careful with this. I'm going to use a contrasting example, which is something where maybe it's not appropriate, like grandfather's clock, let's say. You know, what happens if I try to harmonize? Sounds kind of stupid, really. It doesn't sound good. So you have to use your ear to figure out, you know, what works for you. It's not always going to work. And sometimes it works great, but sometimes it doesn't. But minor keys, you're kind of spot on there, Sandy, with the minor keys. The minor keys tend to work really well. Modal songs work really well. I was trying to think if I can think of another modal song. Okay, Salt Creek. Let's go to Salt Creek real quick. And then I think, since I'm already 37 minutes into this, I better get started on the scales. I'm not going to have time to go over all of these double stop things, but you know, you got the meat and potatoes of the double stops anyways. But and then I'll get into the scales. Let's see. Salt Creek, right? So Salt Creek, the B section goes something like, right? So you got a G there. You could harmonize the B with an E underneath if you wanted. Or maybe back and forth between here and here. You just have to be careful because now I'm in Mixolydian, and Mixolydian does not have an F sharp. It has an F natural. So here goes again. Fifths. Hopefully you caught what I did there. That's the melody. I harmonized it with a fifth underneath, which is just a C chord. But maybe you make it a little different. Maybe you make it a fifth. There's the C, the fifth. There's the F. Or maybe you want the F. You can do the fifth up there. Now you're set up for the F. So those sorts of things can add texture to a melody there. All right, I think I'm going to go to the scale transformation simply because I feel like I'm going to run out of time here. I don't want this to be 2 hours of material. And you can always re-watch it, or you can comment or send me a message if you didn't get something. Does anybody have any questions about the scale transformation stuff before I start this, I guess is the question. I gave you like a little bit of a handout there with some instructions, but it may not have been clear. It's a lot of words, and that's partly why I wanted to do this live stream, because I feel like it's a complicated subject. First and foremost is that you have to get the ability to play scales starting from different notes. So if it's a G scale, G to G, not so bad. But can you start to scale on an F sharp? Can you start to scale on a B? On an A? Maybe on an E? And end on an E. It's still the key of G because I'm assuming that somebody behind me was playing a G in the bass. The bass note determines the home bass tonality in this world, at least what I'm dealing with. So we're not like suddenly skipping to a new mode just because we're starting on a different note. Like I said, forget that idea. In some ways that's done more damage than good as far as I'm concerned. So if you have G going, it still sounds like G. I started on an A, but it still sounds like G. So what you want to first do is learn how to start any scale that you practice. You know, it could be a C scale. C scale, what happens if I started on an F? You should be able to do that. Started on an A. You know, it's going to sound different because you're not ending and starting on a C, but that's not the point. Get the ability to start your scales on any note first before you try what I'm about to do, because it gets complicated fast and you got to have that ability. You have to really know, there are two parts to this. You've got to mentally know what are the notes in the scales. So if I say D, you've got to know that that's a C sharp and an F sharp. That's circle fifths back here, okay? And then also you got to physically know where that's at. Okay, so what I'm going to do, here's the idea of scale transformation. And I think that understanding this, my composition teacher, when I was studying composing, he gave me this exercise on the piano, and it really freed up the way I think about things. And I think it's the way that Bach saw scales. He didn't just see them as something you run up and down and you end on it, and there you go, there's a G scale. It's always the same thing, because that's not how it happens in real life. A scale can start from a myriad of places. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run up one scale and I'm going to go down another scale. So I'm going to go up the G major scale and I'm going to go down the C major scale. So what is the difference between G major and C? You can't see it, but C is at the top of the circle, so it has no sharps or flats, and G has an F sharp. So I'll do this slow. G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. But when I come back down, I don't want to hit the F sharp because I'm changing scales. I want to hit the F natural. So on my way down, I'm going to play F natural. So here goes. Now, what messes folks up, where they get all mental, is I just told you that I was playing a C major scale on the way back, but I didn't end on C. I ended where I started, and that's the thing that throws people off. That's why I said you have to be able to start your scales on any note, because what I'm going to do in that handout and tonight is I'm starting everything on G and I'm ending everything on G, no matter what the key is, when I can. Now, there's some keys where you can't use a G. So here goes. G up, C down. And you can strum a chord. If you have to hear it. Okay? But the idea here is, what are we doing? Now, I'm doing this fast for time's sake. Do not do this fast. I would recommend A, calling out the notes G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, F, E, D, C, B, A, G. Naming them as you're playing it. Do it really slow, as slow as you need to, so you know the names of the notes. And then this is testing you on the ability to see how close these two scales are on that circle of fifths. C and G only differ by one note, so they're very closely related. Okay, so you got G, C. Now, let's keep going. That's one sharp. What's two sharps different from G? Or, sorry, not two sharps. Only one note difference from G the other way, which is this way. I'm going down the circle that way. What key is next to it? It is G, D. D is on the other side. So to get from G to D, I only change one note. I change C to C sharp. So what do I mean? Here goes. This will make more sense when I play it. That's a D note. I do not play a C on the way down. I play a C sharp. And it's going to sound weird. Here goes. Your ear is probably going to scream and say, what was that mess? So what I did is, when I got to G, I started up the G scale, but then on the way down, I'm playing a D major scale. There's my C sharp. And I'm not going down to D. I'm stopping on G. So what this does is this teaches me how are G and D connected. They're connected by one note difference. I call it a transformation. You're transforming the C into a C sharp. So I have G scale, D scale, does that make sense, or have I lost everybody? That's complicated. So it's more complicated when the banjo gets involved is the problem. Mentally, it's not that hard because between G and C, between G and D, there's only one note difference. So mentally, it's not that difficult to grasp because you're just changing one note. But when the banjo gets involved, that's the problem. I'll do it without the banjo because I think it makes more sense. So all I did is I went up G scale, G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G, and when I got to G, I came down the D major scale and changed it by one note. The one note is C sharp. G, F sharp, E, D, C sharp. And then you get this weird sound. And then everybody says, well, you didn't play a D major scale because you stopped on G. No, it's still a D major scale. If I want to go down to D, I can, but not yet, because that messes you up. You don't see the connection. So you want to, the whole point of this is to see the connections so you don't just learn a scale and memorize it and you don't see how anything is connected. You want to know that to get from C to G, I just changed one note. To get from G to D, I only change one note. That's the idea. Now, one more complication. I don't want to get into too many of them. I'm not going to go through all of them because when I get over here from G to, say, D flat, it gets really complicated. There's a lot of sharps and flats that changes. So let's just do it on our hands before we begin, and then I'm going to maybe go about 10 more minutes, and then I'll wrap things up and ask more questions. So G to F, what's the difference? G to F. You have, in the key of F, or the scale of F, you have an F natural. What else? Anything else? Anybody know? In the key of F, you have an F natural, but then you also have a flat. You have a B flat, okay? So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to go up the G major scale, down the F major scale, F, E, D, C, B flat, A, and yes, I'm ending on G and not F. So it looks like this. So what that does is that teaches me what is the note that changed between G and F. The F, not B, B flat. And now I start to see how these notes and keys are connected. So from G to F, you change two notes. And this is the thing. I studied music for 20-something years, I guess. And then when I started studying with a composer, he started asking me these questions like, okay, from, I don't know, A to B flat, how many notes change? How are they connected? What happens if you take a G and then you flatten the E? What scale do you get? Crazy questions like that. And you think you really know the scales, but you don't, because all you've done is you've just memorized, oh, here's a G scale. Okay, here's a B flat scale. But, you know, anybody can do that if they practice it enough. But the idea is that you're missing out on the connection, the logical connection of them. And then this really helps you when you want to try to do like a modulation. Like let's say you want to modulate from G to F. You know, how do you do that with just notes? I just did it. You have to be able to know how that is connected. I'm going to do one more. Like I said, I don't want to run this into the ground. You can't see it, but here's G. 208 is A. So if you change two notes the other way, you get the key of A. What are those two notes you're changing? You get an F sharp, a C sharp, and a G sharp. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to take a G scale. On the way down, the F sharp stays the same. The E stays the same. The D stays the same. But you now have a C sharp. You have a B, that stays the same. A. And then here's where we unfortunately, you get a G sharp. So here's going up the G scale, down the A scale. Now people are really going to hate me there because that does not sound like an A scale. And that's because I ended on the G sharp. But that's not the point. The point of the exercise is to see how they're connected. I could just as well do that. I could move the G sharp up to an A and say, yes, it's an A scale. That one note changes everything. But the idea is to see what changes between the G to make it an A scale. C sharp, G sharp. That's it, 2 notes. I could keep going down. And end on E. It doesn't matter where I end. But the idea is to see the relationship between them. So I'm going to do this fast. G to C. G to D. G to F. G to A. Doesn't sound resolved, but that is the correct answer. Is that making sense? I feel like it's complicated stuff, but the whole point of this, it's a lot of work. It really is. I mean, you really have to know your stuff. You have to really know what are the notes in every scale, and what notes are in every scale on the fingerboard too. But where you might start is you might just quiz yourself, like just pick G and A, 2 keys, mentally, no instrument in your hand. G and A, what's the difference between them? And you don't have to like rattle off the entire scale, just what is the difference? How many notes difference are there? It's 2. G and A, differences, C sharp and G sharp. And then you go to your instrument, you work it out. You say, okay, G, C sharp, G sharp. Now, you can take this and you can literally, I mean, I hate to say this, I've given you like almost like a lifetime of stuff to work on here because you don't ever really master your scales. I've been playing 25 years, 27 years on the, if you take into account the guitar, and you still don't know them as well in certain keys. Like, you know, if you ask me to play it in D flat, some awful key, I really have to stretch my brain and think about it. But you could take this and move it up and down the fingerboard. So like if I'm in the key of G and I want to switch to C up here, F sharp is here. No, I don't want F sharp. I want an F. So I'll go down. I'll go up G major. There's my F natural. But notice I'm always ending on where I started. What if I wanted to do the key of E flat? You see, it gets further and further away sounding. And modern music does that sort of thing. My way of kind of working at this was, I used to sit at the piano. I'm not much of a piano player, but I used to sit at the piano player and try to figure out ways I could modulate with just notes and not chords. You know, and I would pick something different, you know, like how do I get from the key of G to E flat just using scales? Something like that. It's slow. I tell you another thing too. This is very common. I deal with this as a teacher all the time. is it slows people's thinking down. And I think the number one reason that a lot of times people don't make progress is because they just pick up their banjo and they play and they're not thinking. It's just like autopilot stuff. But this slows down your thinking. And I'm not saying you need to do this your whole practice session, by no means. I mean, this is just a very tiny thing to work on as far as I'm concerned. Especially if you just want to play bluegrass. A lot of this is not really useful for just playing bluegrass. But if you want to learn jazz, classical, or just, for the love of the instrument, just learn, work on theory stuff for any instrument, this is really helpful. But if you can kind of see, like, okay, here's my G scale, and then to get to A, I only change, okay, I changed the G sharp, okay, I changed the C to C sharp, okay, and then you'll actually, it's very difficult in the beginning, but it actually makes things easier in the long run, if that makes sense, because you start to see how it's all related. And I guess that's the point I'm trying to make, is I think Bach saw them as things you move in and out of. And that's the thing that people miss, just learning scales on an instrument, is they become almost dead. They're just like, oh, here is what I do when I play the G major scale. But really, it should be, kind of an alive thing that you can change. And you can say, okay, it could be fun. You could say, well, what do I do if I'm in G and I want to get to B flat? F, G minor, I don't know. We haven't even gotten to that stuff yet. But the idea is that the scales become things that connect you from one place to the other, and they really help you understand music. But you really want to see how things are connected. And the way I'm kind of doing it now, even in my own studies, is just picking keys and seeing how many different ways I can modulate in and out of them. If I'm in G, how do I get to E? Well, there's my E, but maybe I don't want to just go there. I think our brain, hey John, it's great to see you in here. It's been a long time. Our brain is so caught up in chords with modern thinking, and I think sometimes we miss the melodies and single note ways of modulating. But yes, that's the idea. The difference between what I kind of did tonight and with Bach was more constrained just due to the time period. They wouldn't modulate, but so many. Where's my circle fifth? It's gone. But they would basically only move maybe 2 or 3 places around the circle fifth. They wouldn't jump to, say, like the tritone or something weird as far as the modulation goes. So, but it's all kind of the same thing. But yes, it's all very, very useful stuff. I think it's helped me kind of, after 20-something years of playing, to not be so bored with scales anymore, because there's only so much you can do with them after a while. It's like, well, what else can I do with this? But when I really started composing and sitting at the piano and thinking about all the little individual notes, it really helped me out. Okay, well, everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'll do this again. I kind of like this format tonight, which was I just pick a topic and we just do it. That's kind of nice. I think it keeps it coherent, at least. And then if you have any questions, you can always shoot me an email or throw it in the comments. But you guys, thanks so much for tuning in, and I will see you soon.